The Italian Mafia boss who couldn't stop watching the black nurse he wasn't supposed to touch. Some men carry silence like a weapon. The kind that makes rooms go still when they enter. The kind that makes people forget their own names. Facino Rizzo was that kind of man. And Krista Miller was standing at the edge of his hospital bed, checking his vitals, pretending she didn't notice. It was February 13th, the night before Valentine's Day. Outside, Chicago's Gold Coast glittered with early snow. Inside room 4012 of Northwestern Memorial, the air felt different. Heavy, charged. Krista wore navy blue scrubs, her natural hair pulled back in a low puff. Her hands moved with precision. Blood pressure cuff. Pulse oximeter. Chart notes. She'd done this 1,000 times. But not like this. Not with a man whose tattooed knuckles told stories she didn't want to read. Not with a man whose muscular frame barely fit the hospital bed. Not with a man who watched her like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. She felt his eyes track her fingers as she adjusted his foreline. She didn't look up. He should have. What happens when the safest thing you can do is leave? But something in you stays anyway. If this is your kind of story, go ahead and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from. I'll be here. Now let's begin. Krista had worked the night shift at Northwestern Memorial for 3 years. She knew how to read a room before she stepped into it. She knew which patients needed soft voices and which ones needed space. She knew when families were holding on to hope and when they were holding on to each other. But room 4012 broke every pattern she understood. Facino Rizzo had been admitted 48 hours earlier. Gunshot wound to the lower abdomen. Surgery had gone well. Recovery was progressing normally. On paper, he was just another patient moving through the system. Nothing about him felt normal. The men who rotated outside his door never spoke to her. They wore dark suits and stood with their hands clasped in front of them, eyes scanning the hallway like they expected trouble to walk around the corner at any moment. Hospital security had questioned their presence twice. Both times someone made a phone call and the questions stopped. Krista learned quickly not to ask. Tonight she entered his room at 11:15. The lights were dimmed. Chicago's skyline pressed against the window, all cold glass and distant warmth. Facino was sitting up slightly, his hospital gown doing nothing to hide the tattoos that covered his chest and shoulders. Intricate designs. Italian words she couldn't translate. A snake winding up his forearm. A crown at the base of his throat. He looked like danger given a body. And he was watching her again. "You're late," he said. His voice was low. Rough. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. Krista kept her expression neutral as she approached his bedside. "I'm right on schedule, Mr. Rizzo. 11:15 vitals check. You came at 11:10 last night." She paused, her fingers hovering over the blood pressure monitor. He'd noticed. He'd tracked a 5-minute difference in her routine. "Traffic in the hallway," she said. It wasn't a lie. A patient in room 4008 had needed assistance getting to the bathroom. But the fact that she felt the need to explain anything to him unsettled her. Facino's eyes moved across her face. Dark brown, almost black. Unreadable. "You don't have to explain yourself to me." "I wasn't." The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. Something closer to recognition. Like she'd passed a test she didn't know she was taking. Krista wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. His skin was warm beneath her fingers. She could feel the hardness of muscle underneath, the tension he carried even while lying in a hospital bed. This was not a man who knew how to rest. 130/85, she said, recording the numbers. Still a little elevated. "Are you in pain?" "No. The chart says you refused your last dose of pain medication." "I don't like the way it makes my head feel." Krista glanced at him. Most patients in his condition begged for medication. They watched the clock, counting minutes until their next dose. Facino Rizzo refused it entirely. "Pain management helps the healing process," she said carefully. "Your body can't repair itself efficiently if it's fighting discomfort. My body's been fighting longer than you've been alive." He said it simply. Without arrogance. Just fact. "I know what it can handle." She didn't argue. She'd learned that some patients needed to be pushed and others needed to find their own way. Facino struck her as the second kind. The kind who would do the opposite of whatever anyone told him just to prove he could. She reached for the pulse oximeter and her fingers brushed against his wrist. He went still. Not tense. Not startled. So, like a predator who'd caught a scent and was deciding what to do about it. Krista felt the shift in the room. The air grew thicker. She kept her eyes on the oximeter screen, watching the numbers climb to 98%. Your oxygen levels are good, she said. Her voice came out steady. Professional. He was proud of that. You have steady hands. She looked up without meaning to. Facino was studying her fingers. The way they rested against his skin. The way she held the small device with practiced ease. Most people who walk into this room are nervous, he continued. Their hands shake. Their voices get higher. They look everywhere except at me. I'm a nurse. I see all kinds of patients. Not like me. It wasn't a boast. It was an observation. And he was right. Krista removed the oximeter and stepped back, creating distance she hadn't realized she needed. You're recovering well. The surgical team will probably clear you for discharge within the week. And then you won't have to see me anymore. She couldn't tell if it was a statement or a question. His expression gave nothing away. That's how hospitals work, Mr. Rizzo. People get better. They leave. Facino. Excuse me. My name is Facino. Mr. Rizzo was my father. Krista hesitated. There were rules about this. Professional boundaries that existed for good reason. Using a patient's first name created familiarity. Familiarity created complications. I'll make a note about the pain medication refusal, she said, sidestepping his request entirely. Dr. Chin will want to discuss alternatives with you in the morning. She turned toward the door. Krista. Her feet stopped moving before her brain caught up. She hadn't told him her first name. Her badge said K. Miller. Nothing else. She turned back slowly. How do you know my name? Facino's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes did. A flicker of something she couldn't identify. Amusement maybe. Or something darker. I know a lot of things, he said quietly. It's how I've stayed alive this long. The words hung between them. A warning dressed as an answer. Krista should have felt afraid. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this man was dangerous, that she should request a transfer to a different floor, that she should never set foot in this room again. But fear wasn't what she felt. It was something else. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as fear but paid different rent. Good night, Mr. Rizzo, she said. She didn't use his first name. That felt important. She walked out of the room and didn't look back. But she felt his eyes on her until the door clicked shut. In the hallway, one of the suited men glanced at her briefly. His face was a mask. No expression. No acknowledgement. Just a quick assessment before his gaze returned to scanning the corridor. Krista walked to the nurse's station on legs that felt less steady than they should have. Her colleague Marcus was charting at the computer. He looked up as she approached. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. She pulled up her patient list on the adjacent screen, focusing on the familiar glow of data. Just tired. Marcus lowered his voice. Is it the guy in 4012? I've heard things. What kind of things? The kind that make people disappear for asking. Marcus shook his head. I'm just saying be careful. That's not a normal patient. I noticed. She spent the rest of her shift avoiding room 4012. Other nurses could handle the routine checks. She had plenty of other patients who needed her attention. But even as she worked, she felt something pulling at the edge of her thoughts. A question she couldn't shake. How did he know her name? And why did part of her want him to say it again? At 3 in the morning, she found herself standing outside his door. She wasn't sure how she'd gotten there. Her rounds had taken her in the opposite direction. Through the small window, she could see him lying awake, staring at the ceiling. His jaw was tight. His hands were clenched at his sides. He was in pain. Real pain. The kind he refused to admit. Krista should have walked away. She'd already checked his vitals. There was no medical reason to enter. But she'd become a nurse because she couldn't stand to watch people suffer. It was the thing that got her through 16-hour shifts and difficult patients and a system that often felt designed to break people rather than heal them. She couldn't turn that part of herself off. Even for a man like Facino Rizzo. She pushed the door open. His head turned immediately. Those dark eyes found her in the dim light. Couldn't stay away? His voice was strained. Tighter than before. You're hurting, she said simply. I can see it. I told you. I don't want the medication. Krista moved to his bedside and pulled up a chair. She sat down without asking permission. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't object. There are other ways to manage pain, she said. Breathing techniques. Distraction. Sometimes just having someone sit with you helps. You're going to sit with me? If you'll let me. Facino stared at her for a long moment. The hardness in his expression flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see something underneath. Surprise. And something that looked almost like loneliness. Why would you do that? It was a real question. Not a challenge. He genuinely didn't understand why someone would offer him comfort without expecting something in return. Krista met his eyes steadily. Because that's what I do. I take care of people. Even people like me. Everyone deserves care when they're hurting. Even people like you. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the city hummed its quiet nighttime rhythm. Snow fell past the window in lazy spirals. Slowly, Facino's hands unclenched. His jaw relaxed by a fraction. He was still watching her, but the intensity had shifted. It felt less like being hunted and more like being seen. You're not afraid of me, he said. It sounded like a revelation. Should I be? He didn't answer. But he didn't look away either. Krista stayed in that chair until his breathing evened out and his eyes finally closed. She watched the tension drain from his shoulders, watched his face soften into something that almost looked peaceful. He was still a dangerous man. She knew that. But dangerous men were still men. And this one, she was beginning to realize, had been alone for a very long time. She left before he woke up. But this time, when she walked out of room 4012, she knew something had changed. She just didn't know yet what it would cost her. Valentine's Day arrived wrapped in gray clouds and freezing rain. The hospital tried to make it festive. Paper hearts hung from the nurse's station. Someone had brought in chocolate truffles wrapped in red foil. A few patients received flower deliveries that made the hallways smell like roses and baby's breath. Krista worked through all of it with her head down. She'd picked up a double shift. 16 hours. It wasn't about the money, though the overtime helped. It was about keeping her mind occupied. About filling the hours with tasks and routines and the steady rhythm of work. Valentine's Day had never been her favorite holiday. It reminded her of things she'd rather forget. It reminded her of Darius. She pushed the thought away as soon as it surfaced. She'd gotten good at that over the past 2 years. Packing certain memories into boxes and shoving them into dark corners of her mind where they couldn't reach her. Today wasn't the day to open those boxes. By 7 in the evening, her feet ached and her shoulders were tight with tension. She'd handled 3 admissions, 2 discharges, and 1 code blue that had left everyone on the floor shaken. The patient had survived, but barely. Krista stood at the window near the supply closet, looking out at the rain streaking down the glass. The city lights blurred into smears of color. Yellow and white and red, all bleeding together like a painting left out in a storm. You've been avoiding me. She didn't turn around. She'd know that voice anywhere now. Low and rough, with an accent that softened certain consonants and sharpened others. I've been working, she said. There's a difference. Facino moved to stand beside her. He was wearing a hospital robe over his gown, his 4-pole trailing behind him like an obedient shadow. He shouldn't have been out of bed. His surgical wound was still healing. Any sudden movement could cause complications. But she was learning that Facino Rizzo didn't follow rules. Not even the ones designed to keep him alive. You haven't checked my vitals in 36 hours, he said. Marcus has been coming instead. Marcus is a good nurse. Marcus is terrified of me. His hands shake so badly I'm surprised he can read the monitors. Krista almost smiled. Almost. Maybe you should try being less intimidating. I don't know how to be anything else. She finally looked at him. He was studying her face with that intensity she'd grown accustomed to. But there was something different in his expression tonight. Something she couldn't quite name. You should be resting, she said. Walking around isn't good for your recovery. I needed to see you. The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water. Direct. Unfiltered. No pretense. Krista felt her chest tighten. Mr. Rizzo. Facino. Mr. Rizzo, she repeated firmly. I'm your nurse. So, when you're discharged, you'll forget I exist within a week. No. He said it quietly. With certainty. I won't. The rain continued its steady assault on the window. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang 3 times before someone answered it. Normal hospital sounds. Normal life continuing around them. Nothing about this felt normal. Why me? Krista asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. You have men outside your door who would do anything you asked. You probably have women who would crawl through glass to be near you. Why are you standing here with a night shift nurse who isn't even supposed to be talking to you like this? Facino was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. Almost soft. Because you sat with me. Krista blinked. What? 2 nights ago. When I couldn't sleep. When the pain was bad and I wouldn't admit it. He turned to face the window, his profile sharp against the city lights. You came into my room and you sat down. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't want anything. You just stayed. That's my job. No. Your job was done. You came back anyway. He paused. No one does that. Not for me. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This was a man who commanded rooms with his silence. A man whose presence made trained security guards nervous. And here he was, standing in a hospital hallway, telling her that simple human kindness had undone something inside him. Krista didn't know how to respond, so she did what she always did when emotions got too complicated. She deflected. You should get back to bed. I'll walk you. She expected him to argue. Instead, he nodded once and let her guide him back down the corridor. The suited men outside room 4012 watched them approach. One of them moved to open the door, but Facino held up a hand. The man stopped immediately. I can manage from here, Facino told Krista. But I want you to know something. She waited. Whatever you're carrying tonight, whatever's making you stand at windows looking at rain like you're hoping it'll wash something away, it doesn't have to be yours alone. Her breath caught. We barely know each other, she whispered. I know enough. His eyes held hers. I know you work doubles when you're trying to escape something. I know you check on patients who aren't assigned to you because you can't stand the thought of anyone suffering alone. I know you have a scar on your left hand near your thumb that you touch when you're nervous. And I know you're sad tonight. The kind of sad that sits in your bones and doesn't leave. Krista's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of him. How do you notice all of that? Facino's expression shifted. Something raw flickered across his features before he locked it away. Because I can't stop watching you. His voice dropped even lower. And I know I should. You're not meant for someone like me. But I look at you and I forget every rule I've ever made for myself. The air between them felt electric. Charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Krista took a step back. She needed distance. She needed to remember who she was and who he was and why this could never be anything more than a patient and his nurse. Good night, Mr. Rizzo. She turned and walked away before he could respond. Her footsteps echoed on the linoleum. Fast. Deliberate. Putting as much space between them as possible. She didn't stop until she reached the break room. It was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A half-eaten box of chocolate sat on the table next to a card that read, Happy Valentine's Day, in cheerful red letters. Krista sank into a plastic chair and pressed her palms against her eyes. What was she doing? She knew who Facino Rizzo was. She'd looked him up after their first conversation. The internet had plenty to say about him. Alleged crime boss. Suspected of involvement in money laundering, extortion, and worse. Nothing proven. Nothing that stuck. But enough smoke that the fire was undeniable. He was dangerous. He was off limits. He was everything she'd spent her life avoiding. And yet, when he looked at her, she felt seen. Not assessed. Not categorized. Like he was looking past all her armor and finding the person she'd buried underneath. She hated how much she wanted that. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and stared at the screen. A text from her mother. Happy Valentine's Day, sweetheart. Thinking of you and Darius today. Love you. Krista's hand trembled. Darius. Her brother. Her only sibling. The person who'd taught her to ride a bike and scared away bullies and held her hand at their father's funeral. Dead now. 2 years. She'd never gotten a straight answer about what happened. The police had called it a robbery gone wrong. A random act of violence in a city full of random violence. But Krista knew her brother. Darius wasn't random. Darius didn't just end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Darius had been into something. Something he'd never told her about. Something that got him killed. She'd spent 2 years trying to find answers. 2 years hitting dead ends and closed doors and people who suddenly developed amnesia when she asked the wrong questions. Eventually, she'd given up. Not because she'd found peace, but because the searching was destroying her. She couldn't keep chasing ghosts and expect to survive. So she'd packed Darius into one of those mental boxes and tried to move on. But Valentine's Day made it hard. Darius had been murdered on February 15th. The day after love and roses and chocolate hearts. Like the universe had a cruel sense of humor. Krista stared at her mother's text for a long moment. Then she typed back, "Love you too, Mama. Talk soon." She put the phone away and wiped her eyes. She had 6 more hours of her shift. 6 more hours of vital signs and medication rounds and patients who needed her to be strong. She could fall apart later. In her apartment. Alone. But when she stood up to leave the break room, she found herself thinking about Facino's words. Whatever you're carrying tonight, it doesn't have to be yours alone. What would it feel like to actually believe that? She pushed the thought away and went back to work. At midnight, she finally returned to room 4012. She told herself it was professional obligation. His vitals were overdue. Marcus was busy with another patient. But she knew the truth. She wanted to see him again. The room was dim when she entered. Facino was lying on his side facing the window. For a moment she thought he was asleep. Then he spoke. "You came back. I always come back. It's my job." He rolled over slowly, carefully, mindful of his healing wound. In the low light his features looked softer. The hard edges worn down by pain and exhaustion and something else she couldn't identify. "It's after midnight," he said. "That means Valentine's Day is over." "Technically, yes." "Good." He pushed himself up slightly, wincing at the movement. "I don't like that holiday. Makes people pretend love is simple. Red and pink and hearts that fit on cards." Krista moved to his bedside to check the monitors. "You don't think love is simple?" "I think love is the most complicated thing in the world. It makes strong men weak. It makes smart men stupid. It makes careful men reckless." She recorded his numbers on the chart. Blood pressure slightly lower than yesterday. Oxygen levels stable. Heart rate elevated but within acceptable range. "Speaking from experience?" she asked without looking at him. "I've never been in love." She glanced up. "Never. I've had women. I've had arrangements. I've had transactions disguised as relationships." His jaw tightened. "But love? The kind that makes you willing to burn everything down for one person? No. I thought I was immune." "Thought." The word hung between them. Facino held her gaze. "Thought." Krista's heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to change the subject. She needed to redirect this conversation to something safe. Something professional. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What changed?" He didn't answer immediately. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand where it rested on the bed rail. His fingers were warm, calloused, gentle in a way she hadn't expected. "You walked into this room," he said quietly, "and nothing's been the same since." Krista should have pulled away. She knew that. Every professional boundary she'd ever learned was screaming at her to step back, to remind him of their roles, to shut this down before it went somewhere neither of them could return from. But she didn't move. For a long moment they stayed like that. His hand over hers. The monitors beeping their steady rhythm. The rain tapping against the window like a patient visitor. Then Krista made a choice. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. She didn't speak. He didn't need to. The gesture said everything. "I see you too." Facino's breath caught. His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. When she finally looked at his face, she saw something she'd never expected to see on a man like him. Fear. Not of her. Not of this. But of what this could mean. Of what it could cost. Of what he stood to lose if he let himself want something this badly. "This is dangerous," he said. "Not a warning. An observation. I know. I'm not a good man, Krista. I know that too. Then why are you still holding my hand?" He thought about the question. About all the reasons she should let go. About her brother and her grief and the walls she'd built to protect herself. Because you're the first person in a long time who looked at me like I matter, she said. Not as a nurse. Not as a function. Just as me. Facino brought her hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed against her knuckles was soft. Almost reverent. You matter, he said against her skin. More than you know. The moment stretched. Fragile and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Then Krista's pager went off. The sound shattered the silence like glass. She pulled her hand back, fumbling for the device clipped to her scrubs. Room 4008. Patient in distress. I have to go, she said. Her voice came out breathless. Facino nodded. His expression had closed again, locking away whatever vulnerability he'd shown her. But his eyes were different now. Warmer. Like she'd given him something precious without realizing it. Go, he said. Save someone. It's what you do. She hurried toward the door. But before she left, she stopped and looked back at him. Tomorrow, she said. We should talk. Really talk. About what this is. Tomorrow, he agreed. She walked out of the room and rushed down the hall toward her emergency. Her mind raced with everything that had just happened. Everything that was about to change. She didn't notice the man standing in the shadows near the supply closet. The man who'd been watching the entire exchange through the window of room 4012. The man who pulled out a phone and made a quiet call. It's happening, he said. Just like you thought. He's getting attached. He listened to the voice on the other end. Yes. The nurse. Miller. Pause. Understood. I'll keep watching. He hung up and disappeared down the corridor. And Krista, caught up in the complicated web of something she couldn't yet name, had no idea that her life was about to shatter. Or that the man she was falling for had a secret that would break her. 3 days passed. Facino's recovery accelerated faster than anyone expected. Dr. Chen called it remarkable. The surgical team attributed it to his physical conditioning, the dense muscle mass that had protected his organs from worse damage. Krista knew the truth was more complicated. He was healing because he had a reason to. Every night she found herself in room 4012 longer than her duties required. They talked about small things at first. Safe things. The weather. The city. The terrible coffee in the hospital cafeteria. But the conversations grew deeper as the hours stretched. He told her about growing up in a village outside Naples. About his mother who died when he was 7. About his father who raised him with fists and silence and lessons about power that left scars no one could see. He told him about Detroit. About her mother who still lived in the same house Krista had grown up in. About nursing school and the professor who told her she didn't have what it took. About proving that professor wrong every single day. She didn't tell him about Darius. That box stayed closed. Locked. Buried. But she felt it shifting inside her. Rattling against its constraints. Demanding to be opened. On the 4th night, Facino was cleared for discharge. Krista found out from the charge nurse during shift change. Her stomach dropped when she heard the news, though she kept her expression neutral. Tomorrow morning, the charge nurse said, scanning her tablet. His people are arranging private transport. Some fancy car service probably. You know how these rich patients are. Rich wasn't the word Krista would have used. But she nodded and moved on with her rounds. She saved room 4012 for last. When she entered, Facino was standing by the window. He'd changed out of his hospital gown into real clothes. Dark slacks, a black button-down shirt that stretched across his shoulders and chest. His tattoos peeked out from the open collar. The snake on his forearm seemed to move when he shifted his weight. He looked like himself again. Powerful. Dangerous. The kind of man who walked into rooms and owned them without saying a word. The kind of man who was about to walk out of her life. You heard, he said without turning around. I heard. I asked them to delay it. Give me another week. They wouldn't. They were right not to. You're healed. There's no medical reason to keep you. Facino turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. They moved across her face like he was memorizing every detail. Come with me. The words hit her like a physical force. What? When I leave tomorrow. Come with me. Krista shook her head slowly. I have a job. A life. I can't just. I'll give you a better life. He took a step toward her. Then another. Until they were close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and warm that she'd started associating with late-night conversations and the feeling of being seen. I have homes in 3 countries. I have resources most people can't imagine. I can give you anything you want. I don't want things. Then tell me what you want. His voice dropped low. Urgent. Tell me and I'll find a way to give it to you. Krista's throat tightened. She looked up at him, this impossible man who had somehow crawled under her skin and made a home there. I want to know who you really are, she said quietly. Not the version you show the world. Not the boss or the crime lord or whatever they call you in those articles I read. I want to know the man who couldn't sleep because of pain he wouldn't admit. The man who noticed I was sad on Valentine's Day. The man who's standing here asking me to upend my entire life like it's a reasonable request. Facino was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. That man scares me, he finally said. I've spent my whole life building walls. Keeping people out. Making sure no one could ever get close enough to hurt me. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. You walked through every wall like they were made of paper. And I don't know how to protect myself from you. Krista leaned into his touch without meaning to. Her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, he was watching her with something that looked like wonder. Maybe you don't need protection, she whispered. Maybe you just need someone to trust. I don't know how to trust. Then let me teach you. The air between them crackled. Facino's thumb traced her cheekbone, so gentle it barely qualified as a touch. His other hand came up to cradle her face. If I kiss you right now, he said, I won't be able to let you go. Do you understand that? This won't be something I recover from. You won't be someone I forget. Krista's heart pounded against her ribs. Every logical part of her brain was screaming warnings. This was dangerous. This was reckless. This was everything she'd spent her life avoiding. But logic had nothing to do with the way she felt when he looked at her. Logic couldn't explain the ache in her chest or the certainty humming in her bones. Then don't let me go, she said. Facino made a sound low in his throat. Something between a groan and a prayer. And then he kissed her. It was soft at first. Tentative. Like he was asking permission even as he claimed her mouth. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that surprised her, given everything she knew about who he was. She responded in kind. Her hands found his chest, feeling the hard muscle beneath his shirt, the steady thunder of his heart against her palm. He was trembling. This powerful, dangerous man was trembling because of her. The kiss deepened. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. She could feel the heat of him through their clothes. The solid weight of his body against hers. The barely restrained hunger in the way he held her. But he didn't push for more. He didn't grab or demand or take. He kissed her like she was precious. Like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Facino pressed his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed. His expression was raw in a way she'd never seen before. I don't deserve this, he said. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, she admitted. But I'm here anyway. He laughed softly. A real laugh, warm and surprised, like she'd caught him off guard. You're not supposed to agree with me. I'm not going to lie to you. Whatever this is, I want it to be honest. His eyes opened. Dark and intense and full of something she was afraid to name. Then I need to tell you things, he said slowly. About who I am. What I've done. Before this goes any further, you need to know. Krista's stomach tightened. She thought about all the articles she'd read. The allegations. The rumors. The bodies that were never found and the witnesses who disappeared. Okay, she said. Tell me. Facino pulled back slightly. His hands dropped to her shoulders, holding her at arm's length. Not here. Not in this room where anyone could be listening. His jaw tightened. After I'm discharged, I'll send a car for you. There's a place outside the city. Private. Safe. We can talk there. And you'll tell me everything? Everything you need to know. It wasn't the same as everything. He caught the distinction. But she also recognized that trust was built in stages. He was offering her more than he'd offered anyone in a long time. Maybe ever. Okay, she said again. I'll come. Relief flickered across his features. He pulled her close again, pressing a kiss to her forehead that felt like a promise. Tomorrow night, he said against her hair. After your shift, a black car will be waiting in the parking structure. Level 3. This feels very cloak and dagger. My life requires precautions. He pulled back to look at her. You're sure? You're sure you want to step into this? She thought about her quiet apartment, her predictable routine, the grief she carried like a second skeleton inside her body. She thought about what it felt like when he looked at her. I'm sure. Facino kissed her again, softer this time, a goodbye wrapped in a beginning. Then he let her go. Go home, he said. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to change everything. Krista walked to the door on unsteady legs. She paused with her hand on the handle. Facino. He looked at her. Waiting. Whatever you tell me tomorrow, whatever you've done, I want you to know that I see you. The real you. And that person is worth knowing. Something broke in his expression. A crack in the armor he wore so carefully. You might not feel that way after tomorrow, he said quietly. She didn't have an answer for that. So she left without giving one. The next morning, Facino Rizzo checked out of Northwestern Memorial at 8:15. Krista wasn't there to see him go. She'd ended her shift at 6 and gone home to sleep, though sleep had proven elusive. Her mind kept replaying every conversation, every touch, every word he'd spoken. She spent the afternoon convincing herself she wasn't making a terrible mistake. By 5 o'clock she was showered and dressed in dark jeans and a soft gray sweater. Simple. Practical. Nothing that screamed she was trying too hard. She drove to the hospital parking structure and made her way to level 3. The black car was exactly where he'd said it would be. A sleek Mercedes with tinted windows so dark she couldn't see inside. The engine was running, a soft purr that spoke of money and power. A man in a dark suit stood beside the rear passenger door. One of the men from the hospital hallway. He opened the door as she approached and gestured for her to enter. Krista hesitated for just a moment. Then she climbed inside. The interior was all leather and polished wood. Facino was waiting for her. He wore a dark gray suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His tattoos were hidden now, covered by expensive fabric. But she could still see the edge of the crown at the base of his throat. He looked at her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. You came. I said I would. He took her hand as the car pulled out of the parking structure. His grip was firm but gentle. Grounding. They drove north out of the city. Lake Michigan appeared on their right, vast and gray under the February sky. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and pink. Neither of them spoke much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded with anticipation. An hour later they turned onto a private road that wound through bare trees and iron gates. A house appeared at the end of the drive. Modern architecture softened by careful landscaping. Glass and stone and quiet elegance. Not a mansion. But close. This is one of my properties, Facino said as the car stopped. No staff tonight. No guards inside. Just us. Krista looked at the house. At him. You really want to be alone with me? I've wanted to be alone with you since the moment you walked into my hospital room. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. But tonight isn't about what I want. It's about what you need to know. They went inside. The house was warm, fires already lit in the main rooms. Someone had prepared everything before their arrival, then vanished. Facino led her to a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The last light of sunset turned the water to molten gold. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. Then he sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Where do you want me to start? He asked. The beginning. So he told her. He told her about inheriting his father's business at 22. About building it into something larger, something more powerful, something that reached into every corner of Chicago's underworld. He told her about the violence, the blood, the choices he'd made to survive in a world that punished weakness. He didn't make excuses. He didn't soften the truth. He laid it out piece by piece, watching her face for signs that she would run. She didn't run. She listened, asked questions, let him speak without judgment. When he finished, the room was dark except for the firelight. Hours had passed. Krista set down her empty wine glass. Her mind was full of everything he'd shared. Dark things, brutal things, the kind of things that would send most people fleeing. But she'd known what he was when she got in that car. She'd made her choice. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Facino stared at her. "That's all you have to say? What did you expect me to say?" "I expected you to leave." His voice cracked slightly. "I expected you to look at me like I'm a monster." Krista stood and crossed the space between them. She sat beside him on the couch, close enough that their knees touched. "You've done monstrous things," she said carefully. "I won't pretend otherwise. But I've spent 3 years watching people die in hospital beds. Some of them were saints. Some of them were terrible. And you know what I've learned?" He shook his head. "Everyone is more than the worst thing they've done. And everyone is more than the best thing." She reached up and touched his face. His jaw. The stubble that had grown since he'd left the hospital. "You're not a monster, Facino. You're a man. A complicated, damaged, dangerous man. But still a man." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I don't know how to love someone," he said. "I never learned. My father taught me power, control, violence, but not love." "Then we'll figure it out together." She kissed him. This time there was nothing tentative about it. This time she kissed him with everything she had, the grief and loneliness and hope she'd been carrying for so long. He responded immediately, pulling her into his lap, his hands tangling in her hair. They kissed until they were breathless. Until the fire had burned down to embers. Until the moon rose high over the lake. And when they finally pulled apart, Krista rested her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat. "There's one more thing," Facino said quietly. "Something I haven't told you." She tensed slightly. "What?" "The shooting. The reason I was in the hospital." He paused. "It wasn't random. It was payback. For something I did 2 years ago." 2 years ago. Krista lifted her head. Her heart began to beat faster. "What did you do?" Facino's face was shadowed. Unreadable. "There was a man," he said slowly. "He worked for a rival family. He was trying to build a case against me. Gathering evidence. Talking to people who should have stayed quiet." The room felt colder suddenly. Krista's mouth went dry. "What happened to him?" "I had him handled." Facino's jaw tightened. "I didn't pull the trigger myself. But I gave the order. He's dead because of me." Krista pulled back slightly. Something was wrong. Something was scratching at the edge of her consciousness. "When?" she asked. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Exactly when?" "February 15th. 2 years ago." The world tilted. February 15th. The day after Valentine's Day. The day her brother was murdered. Krista's hands began to shake. She stood up, stepping away from the couch. Away from him. "This man," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What was his name?" Facino frowned. "Why does it matter?" "What was his name?" He stood too. Moved toward her. He stepped back. "Krista, what's wrong? Tell me his name." The silence stretched. His frown deepened. And then slowly realization began to dawn on his face. "Miller," he said quietly. His name was Darius Miller. The sound that came out of Krista wasn't quite a scream. It was lower. Roar. The sound of something breaking that could never be repaired. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no. Krista. He was my brother." The words tore out of her like shrapnel. "Darius was my brother. My only brother. And you killed him." Facino's face went pale. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked truly afraid. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you I didn't know." "You didn't know?" She laughed, but it came out broken. Jagged. "You killed him. You had him murdered. You took him away from me, from my mother, and you didn't even remember his name until I made you say it." "Krista, please. Don't." She held up her hand. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she barely felt them. "Don't say my name. Don't touch me. Don't." She couldn't breathe. The room was closing in around her. Everything she'd felt over the past few days. The hope, the connection, the possibility of something real. It was all crumbling to dust. The man she was falling in love with had killed her brother. And she hadn't known. She'd kissed him. Held his hand. Imagined a future. With her brother's murderer. "I need to leave," she said. Her voice was dead. "I need to get out of here. Right now. Let me explain." There's nothing to explain. She looked at him. This man she thought she was beginning to understand. This man who had made her feel seen for the first time in years. You killed him. That's all that matters. She walked toward the door. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Krista. She stopped. But she didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said. His voice broke on the words. I know it means nothing. I know it can't undo what I did. But I'm sorry. More sorry than I've ever been for anything in my life. She stood there for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. Then she walked out into the cold February night, leaving Facino Rizzo standing alone in the firelight. The man who had saved her from loneliness. The man who had murdered her blood. The cold hit Krista like a slap. February in Illinois didn't care about broken hearts. The wind came off the lake sharp and mean, cutting through her sweater like it was made of paper. She wrapped her arms around herself and kept walking, her feet crunching on the gravel driveway. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't breathe the same air as the man who had taken everything from her. The black Mercedes was still parked near the entrance. The driver stood beside it, watching her approach with an expression she couldn't read. Take me back to the city, she said. Her voice came out flat. Vanical. The driver hesitated. He glanced toward the house, then back at her. Mr. Rizzo didn't. I don't care what Mr. Rizzo said. She met his eyes. Let him see the devastation there. The fury barely contained beneath the surface. Take me back to Chicago. Now. Something in her face must have convinced him. He opened the rear door without another word. Krista climbed inside. The leather seats still held traces of warmth from the drive up. She pressed herself against the far door, as far from that warmth as possible. The car pulled away. She didn't look back at the house. She couldn't. The drive back to the city took an hour. Krista spent every minute of it staring out the window, watching the darkness swallow the landscape. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. Facino's hands on her face. His lips against hers. The way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. And then his voice, calm and matter-of-fact, saying her brother's name like it was nothing. Darius Miller. Just another name on a list of people who had gotten in his way. Krista's hands curled into fists. Her nails bit into her palms, but she welcomed the pain. It was real. It was something to hold on to while everything else fell apart. 2 years she'd spent wondering what happened to Darius. 2 years of questions with no answers. 2 years of grief that had no target, no face, no name. Now she had all three. And she'd kissed him. She'd sat in his hospital room and held his hand and let herself imagine a future. The shame of it burned worse than the grief. The driver dropped her at the hospital parking structure where her car was still parked. She got out without thanking him. Without looking at him. She just walked to her car, climbed inside and sat there in the dark. Her phone was buzzing in her pocket. He pulled it out. 6 missed calls from an unknown number. 3 text messages. Krista, please let me explain. I didn't know who he was to you, I swear I didn't know. Tell me where you are. Tell me you're safe. She stared at the messages for a long moment. Then she blocked the number. The silence that followed felt like relief. She drove home on autopilot. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Dishes in the sink, a book open on the couch, the lamp in the corner casting its familiar yellow glow. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like it belonged to someone whose life hadn't just shattered into 1,000 pieces. Krista walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower as hot as it would go. She stripped off her clothes and stepped under the spray, letting the water scald her skin. She stood there until the water ran cold. Until her body was numb. Until she couldn't feel anything at all. Then she wrapped herself in a towel and sat on the edge of her bed and finally let herself cry. Not pretty crying. Not the kind you see in movies. This was ugly. Raw. The kind of crying that comes from the deepest part of you, the part that remembers what it felt like to be whole. He cried for Darius. For the brother she'd lost and the answers she'd finally found. For the justice that would never come because men like Facino Rizzo didn't face consequences. They wrote the rules. They owned the game. They walked through the world leaving bodies behind them and never looked back. She cried for herself. For the woman who had started to believe in something. Who had let herself hope just for a moment that she might not have to be alone forever. And somewhere in the middle of all that grief, a new feeling began to take shape. Bigger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns itself out quickly. This was colder, quieter. The kind of anger that doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. Facino Rizzo had killed her brother. And she'd walked right into his arms like a fool. But she wasn't a fool. She was a woman who had survived loss and loneliness and a system that had never protected people like her. She was stronger than this. Smarter than this. The question was, what was she going to do about it? She called in sick the next day. And the day after that. She spent 48 hours in her apartment, not eating, barely sleeping, cycling between grief and rage like a pendulum that couldn't find center. On the third day her phone rang. A number she recognized. Her mother. Krista stared at the screen. She couldn't talk to her mother right now. Couldn't pretend everything was fine when everything was broken. The phone kept ringing. She answered anyway. "Hey mama. Baby girl." Her mother's voice was warm. Familiar. The sound of home. "I've been trying to reach you. You okay? You sound tired. Just working a lot. You know how it is." "Mom." Her mother wasn't convinced. She never was. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" Krista closed her eyes. She could picture her mother sitting at the kitchen table in Detroit, phone pressed to her ear, reading her daughter's silence like scripture. "I found out something," Krista said slowly. "About Darius." The pause on the other end was heavy. "What kind of something?" "I know who did it, Mama. I know who killed him." Another pause. Longer this time. "How?" Her mother's voice had changed. Sharper now. More alert. "It doesn't matter how. I know. And I don't know what to do with it. You go to the police." The police couldn't solve it in 2 years. "What makes you think they'll do anything now?" "Then what, Krista? What are you thinking about doing?" That was the question, wasn't it? The one she'd been circling for 3 days. What was she going to do? She could walk away. Block his number, forget his face, try to rebuild the walls he'd demolished. Move on with her life like none of this had ever happened. But Darius deserved more than that. Her mother deserved more than that. She deserved more than that. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I'm not going to let it go. I can't." "Krista." Her mother's voice softened. "I know you loved your brother. I loved him too. He was my baby boy. But he's gone. And nothing you do is going to bring him back. You hear me? Nothing." "I hear you. Do you?" "Because I can hear that tone in your voice. That stubborn tone you get when you're about to do something foolish." "I'm not being foolish, Mama. I'm just thinking." "Well, think careful. Whatever you're mixed up in, whatever you found out, it's not worth losing you too. I already buried one child. I can't bury another." The words hit Krista like a punch to the chest. "I'll be careful," she said. "I promise. Call me tomorrow. Let me know you're okay." "I will." She hung up and sat staring at the phone in her hand. Her mother was right. Darius was gone. Nothing could change that. But something else her mother had said kept echoing in her mind. Whatever you're mixed up in. She wasn't mixed up in anything. Not anymore. She'd walked away. Cut all ties. Closed the door on Facino Rizzo and everything he represented. Hadn't she? The answer came 2 hours later in the form of a knock on her door. Krista wasn't expecting anyone. She wasn't dressed for company, sweatpants, old t-shirt, hair wrapped in a scarf she hadn't touched in days. She approached the door cautiously. Looked through the peephole. Her heart stopped. Facino stood in the hallway. He wore a dark coat over dark clothes. His face looked haggard. Shadows under his eyes. Days of stubble on his jaw. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since she left him. Good, she thought viciously. She hoped he never slept again. "I know you're in there," he said through the door. His voice was rough. Strained. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me. Then you'll be standing there forever. If that's what it takes." Krista pressed her forehead against the door. Her hands were shaking again. Anger or fear or something in between. "How did you find me? Does it matter?" "It matters." Pause. "I have resources, Krista. You know that. I can find anyone." "So you tracked me down. Invaded my privacy. Showed up at my home uninvited." Her voice was getting louder. Harder. "You think that's going to make me want to talk to you? I think you deserve answers. Real answers. Not the fragments I gave you before. I know everything I need to know. You killed my brother. End of story. It's not that simple. It is to me. Silence from the other side of the door. Then softer. Krista, please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. After that, if you want me to leave, I'll leave. You'll never see me again. I swear it. She should have told him to go. Should have called the police or her building security, or anyone who could make him disappear. But a part of her, the part that still ached with unanswered questions, needed to hear what he had to say. She unlocked the door. Facino stood in the doorway close enough to touch. His eyes moved over her face, cataloging every detail. The swollen eyes, the exhaustion, the anger she wasn't trying to hide. You look terrible, he said quietly. So do you. He almost smiled. Almost. Can I come in? She stepped aside. He entered her apartment slowly, taking in the small space with its second-hand furniture and framed photos on the walls. His eyes lingered on a picture near the window. Krista and Darius. Graduation day. She was wearing her nursing school cap. He had his arm around her shoulder, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Facino's face went pale when he saw it. That's him, he said. Not a question. Yes. He stared at the photo for a long moment. When he turned back to her, his eyes were wet. He looked happy. He was happy. Until you took that away from him. Facino flinched. But he didn't look away. Sit down, Krista said. Say what you came to say. Then get out. She sat on the couch. He took the chair across from her, leaving space between them like he understood he had no right to be close. 2 years ago, he began, I was at war. Not a public war. Not the kind that makes the news. But a war all the same. Another family was trying to take everything I'd built. They were coming at me from every angle. Buying cops. Bribing judges. Turning my own people against me. What does this have to do with Darius? Your brother was a private investigator. Did you know that? Krista blinked. He worked insurance cases. Background checks. Nothing dangerous. That's what he told you. But he was also working for the Moretti family. Gathering evidence against me. Building a case that would have put me away for the rest of my life. She shook her head. No. Darius wouldn't. He did. Facino's voice was gentle but firm. I have proof. Documents. Recordings. I can show you everything. I don't want to see your evidence. I don't care what he was doing. He didn't deserve to die. No. Facino's voice cracked. He didn't. That's what I came here to tell you. That's what I've been trying to say. Krista stared at him. What are you talking about? I gave an order. That part is true. I told my men to handle the situation. In my world, that usually means one thing. He paused, gathering himself. But I also gave specific instructions. I wanted him scared. Roughed up. Maybe hospitalized. Enough to send a message and make him stop. Not enough to kill him. But he's dead. Because one of my men went too far. Took it upon himself to make an example. Facino's hands clenched into fists. I found out 3 days later. And when I did, I had that man killed. Fully. Painfully. Every day he lived after what he did to your brother was a day too long. Krista's mind was reeling. She didn't know what to believe. Didn't know if it changed anything. You're telling me it was an accident? I'm telling you I didn't want him dead. I'm telling you I've regretted that night every day since. I'm telling you that when I found out who you were, who he was to you, I wanted to die. Tears were streaming down his face now. The most powerful man she'd ever met, crying in her living room like a child. I can't undo it, he said. I can't bring him back. I can't make it right. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I want your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just need you to know that your brother's death haunts me. And now it haunts me twice because it means I've lost you too. Krista sat in silence. The weight of everything pressing down on her. She'd expected defenses. Justifications. The cold logic of a man who saw people as chess pieces. She hadn't expected this. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. What do you want from me? Facino wiped his face with the back of his hand. When he looked at her, his eyes were raw. I want you to know the truth. All of it. And then I want you to make whatever choice you need to make. If you want me gone, I'll go. If you want me dead, I won't stop whoever you send. He paused. But if there's any part of you that might someday be able to see me as something other than your brother's killer, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn that. He stood up, moved toward the door. I meant what I said at the hospital, he said with his hand on the doorknob. I've never felt this way about anyone. You broke something open in me that I didn't know was sealed. And I know that doesn't matter now. I know it can't matter. But it's true. He opened the door. Facino. He stopped, turned. Krista stood slowly. Her legs felt weak. Her heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions at once. I need time, she said. I need to think. I need to figure out if anything you've said changes what I feel. I understand. And I need you to stay away from me while I do. No calls. No texts. No showing up at my door. Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. Whatever you need. There's one more thing. He waited. Krista walked toward him. Stopped close enough that she could see every line on his face, every trace of exhaustion and grief. If I ever find out you lied to me about any of this, there won't be a place in this world you can hide from me. I will destroy everything you've built. I will burn it all down. Do you understand? For a moment, something like admiration flickered in his eyes. I understand. Good. Now leave. He left. Krista closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her body trembling. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't know if forgiveness was possible or even wanted. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, she would be the one to decide. Not him. Not fate. Not the weight of circumstance. Her choice. Her terms. That was the only power she had left. And she intended to use it. 2 weeks passed. Krista returned to work on the 4th day. She couldn't afford to stay home any longer, and the silence of her apartment had started to feel like a tomb. At least at the hospital there were tasks, routines, people who needed her attention, distractions. She requested a transfer to the pediatric ward. The charge nurse raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. By the end of the week, Krista was working with children instead of adults. Tiny bodies fighting battles they didn't understand. Parents holding on to hope like it was oxygen. It was harder in some ways, easier in others. The children didn't remind her of Facino. Their small hands didn't make her think of tattooed knuckles. Their laughter didn't echo with the memory of a voice that made her chest ache. She threw herself into the work. Double shifts. Extra rounds. Volunteering for tasks no one else wanted. Marcus noticed. Of course he did. You're going to burn out, he said one evening, catching her at the coffee machine. I've seen it happen. People think they can outrun whatever's chasing them, but it always catches up. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on fumes and stubbornness. He lowered his voice. Does this have something to do with the guy from 4012? The one who checked out a few weeks ago? Krista's hand tightened on her coffee cup. What makes you think that? Because you were different after he left. Quieter. Sadder. Marcus shrugged. I'm not trying to pry. I just want you to know that if you need to talk, I'm here. She looked at him. Really looked. Marcus had been her colleague for 3 years. They'd shared shifts and bad cafeteria food and the kind of gallows humor that only healthcare workers understood. He was a good man. Uncomplicated. Safe. Everything Facino wasn't. Thanks, she said. I appreciate that. But I need to figure this out on my own. He nodded and didn't push further. That night, Krista went home and did something she'd been avoiding. She opened the box. Not a physical box. The mental one. The place where she'd stored everything related to Darius. Every memory. Every question. Every fragment of grief she hadn't been ready to face. She sat on her bedroom floor surrounded by actual boxes too. The ones she'd packed up after his death and shoved into her closet. His things. The stuff that was too painful to look at but too precious to throw away. She opened the first box. Photos. Dozens of them. Darius at every age. Baby pictures with their mother holding him like he was made of glass. School photos with awkward haircuts and gap-toothed smiles. Graduation. Birthday parties. Holiday gatherings. And pictures of them together. Brother and sister. 2 kids from Detroit who had promised to always have each other's backs. Krista traced her finger over a photo of Darius at 18. He was standing in front of their mother's house, grinning at the camera, wearing a suit that was slightly too big. What were you into? she whispered to the photo. What didn't you tell me? The photo didn't answer. He kept digging. The second box held his personal effects. The things the police had returned after the investigation went cold. His wallet. His watch. A notebook filled with handwriting she recognized as well as her own. She opened the notebook. Most of it was mundane. Appointment times. Phone numbers. To-do lists. But toward the back the entries changed. Names she didn't recognize. Addresses. Dollar amounts. And one name that made her blood run cold. Moretti. Facino had told the truth. Darius had been involved with the Moretti family. Working for them. Against Facino. She turned more pages. Found references to meetings. Payments. Evidence being gathered. Her brother had been living a double life. One she'd never suspected. The realization hit her like a wave. All those times he'd seemed distracted. All those calls he'd taken in other rooms. All those trips he'd claimed were for insurance work. Lies. All of it. But why? He kept reading. Near the end of the notebook she found her answer. Mom's medical bills are piling up. Insurance won't cover everything. I found another way. It's not clean but it's money. Enough to keep her out of debt. Enough to make sure Krista doesn't have to choose between her dreams and taking care of family. I know what I'm doing is dangerous. But someone has to step up. Someone has to protect them. That's what big brothers do. Krista's vision blurred. Tears dripped onto the page, smearing the ink. Darius hadn't been working for the Morettis because he was greedy or reckless or foolish. He'd been doing it for them. For her. For their mother. He'd walked into a war to keep his family safe. And it had killed him. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest. The grief that washed over her was different now. Deeper. More complicated. Her brother had been trying to protect her. And she hadn't known. Hadn't seen the weight he was carrying. Just like she hadn't seen who Facino really was until it was too late. Or had she? The question surfaced unbidden. She tried to push it away but it wouldn't go. Facino had told her the truth. He'd admitted what he'd done. He'd shown her his regret, his guilt, his devastation. He'd given her the power to destroy him and walked away without fighting. That wasn't the behavior of a monster. Monsters didn't cry. Monsters didn't apologize. Monsters didn't offer themselves up for judgment without conditions. So what was he? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she was starting to think she needed to find one. The next morning, Krista did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother and told her the truth. All of it. The phone call lasted 2 hours. Her mother cried. Krista cried. They talked about Darius and his secrets and the impossible choices he'd made to keep them safe. I always knew he was carrying something, her mother said. He had that look in his eyes. The same look your father had before he died. Like he was trying to hold up the world and afraid it might crush him. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't want to know. Isn't that terrible? I didn't want to know what my baby boy was doing. I just wanted him to come home safe. Her mother's voice cracked. And then he didn't. Mama, there's something else. He told her about Facino. About the hospital. About everything that had happened between them before she'd learned the truth. Her mother was quiet for a long time after she finished. This man, she finally said. The one who gave the order. He's the same one you were falling for. Yes. And he told you himself? Didn't try to hide it. He told me everything. Even things he didn't have to. Another long pause. What are you thinking, baby girl? I can hear you turning something over in your mind. Krista looked out her window at the Chicago skyline. Gray and cold and indifferent. I'm thinking that I don't know how to feel anymore. I'm angry. I'm heartbroken. But I also... She trailed off. You also what? I also remember what it felt like when he looked at me. Like I was the only person in the world who mattered. Her voice dropped to a whisper. No one's ever looked at me like that, Mama. No one. Oh, sweetheart. I know it's wrong. I know it doesn't make sense. He's responsible for Darius being dead. Even if he didn't pull the trigger, he gave the order. How can I feel anything for someone like that? Because feelings don't follow rules, her mother said gently. They don't care about what makes sense or what's right. They just are. So what do I do? That's not something I can tell you. This is your path, Krista. Your choice. Her mother's voice strengthened. But I will say this. Your brother is gone. Nothing changes that. The question is, what do you want the rest of your life to look like? Do you want to spend it carrying anger? Or do you want to find a way to live with what happened and still have room for something good? You're not telling me to forgive him? I'm not telling you anything. Forgiveness isn't something you give because someone else tells you to. It's something you find when you're ready. If you're ever ready. Her mother paused. But I know my daughter. And I know that you've always been someone who looks for the good in people. Even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. Krista wiped her eyes. I don't know if there's enough good in him to find. Then maybe you need to look harder. Or maybe you need to walk away forever. Either way, you need to decide. Because living in this in-between place, that's no kind of life. They talked for a few more minutes. Made promises to call more often. Said the things they always said at the end of conversations. But when Krista hung up, something had shifted. She wasn't ready to forgive. He might never be ready. But she was ready to stop running. That evening, she sat down at her kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and a pen. She didn't know what she was going to write. She just knew she needed to get the words out of her head before they consumed her. Facino. She stared at his name. The letters looked foreign on the page. I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to hate you. It should be easy. You gave the order that led to my brother's death. You're everything I was raised to fear and avoid. You represent a world that chews people up and spits them out without remorse. But I can't hate you. I've tried. God, I've tried. What I feel instead is something I don't have a name for. Sangrias. Grief. Betrayal. But it's also something else. Something that remembers the way you looked at me in that hospital room. The way you held my hand like I was precious. The way you told me the truth even though you knew it might destroy any chance you had with me. I found Darius's notebook. I know now what he was doing. Why he was doing it. He was trying to protect our family just like you said. That doesn't excuse what happened to him. But it helps me understand that the world he stepped into wasn't simple. Wasn't black and white. Nothing is. I'm learning. I don't know what I want. I don't know if I can ever look at you without seeing my brother's face. I don't know if forgiveness is something I'm capable of. But I know that I'm not ready to close this door forever. Not yet. If you meant what you said, about spending the rest of your life trying to earn something from me, then prove it. Not with words. With choices. With the way you live from this point forward. I'm not promising anything. I'm not offering hope. I'm just saying that I see you. The real you. The man underneath the armor. And I'm not looking away. Krista. She read the letter 3 times. Changed a few words. Read it again. Then she folded it carefully and put it in an envelope. She didn't have his address. But she knew someone who did. The next morning she found the suited man who had driven her to and from Facino's lake house. He was standing outside the hospital, leaning against a black car watching the entrance. Watching for her. He sent you, she said. Not a question. The man nodded. He wanted to make sure you were safe. From a distance. Of course he did. Even now, even after everything, he was still protecting her. She held out the envelope. Give this to him. The man took it without comment. His eyes flickered over her face, assessing. He hasn't slept, he said quietly. Hasn't eaten much either. I've worked for him for 12 years. I've never seen him like this. Krista didn't respond. She turned and walked back into the hospital. But she carried the man's words with her for the rest of the day. And somewhere deep inside, in a place she wasn't ready to acknowledge, something that had been frozen began to thaw. 3 days after she sent the letter, Krista came home to find flowers on her doorstep. Not roses. Not the predictable Valentine's cliché she might have expected from a man with unlimited resources. These were wildflowers. A chaotic arrangement of colors and textures that looked like someone had gathered them from a meadow rather than ordered them from a florist. There was no card. No note. Just the flowers wrapped in brown paper and tied with simple twine. She brought them inside and put them in a glass jar on her kitchen counter. They didn't match her apartment. They didn't match anything. But they were beautiful anyway. The next day a book appeared. Slipped under her door sometime during the night. A worn paperback copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Inside the front cover, a single line written in handwriting she didn't recognize. A story about vengeance. And what it costs. She read the book over the next week. She'd read it before years ago in high school. But reading it now with everything that had happened, the story hit differently. A man consumed by revenge. A man who sacrificed everything, including the parts of himself worth saving, for justice that turned to ash in his mouth. She wondered if it was a warning, or a confession, or both. On the 10th day she received a letter. Not delivered by mail. Hand-carried by the same suited man who had been watching the hospital. He approached her in the parking lot after her shift and held out an envelope without speaking. Krista took it. The man nodded once and walked away. She sat in her car and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Krista, I received your letter. I've read it 47 times. I'm not exaggerating. I've counted. You asked me to prove myself through choices. Through how I live from this point forward. I want you to know that I'm trying. It's not easy. The life I've built doesn't change overnight. But I'm making decisions differently now. Asking questions I never asked before. Thinking about consequences beyond the immediate. I can't undo what happened to Darius. That weight will live in my chest until I die. But I can choose what kind of man I become from here. You said you're not looking away. I don't know what that means yet. I don't know if it means there's a path forward for us, or if it just means you're watching to see what I do. Either way, I'll take it. I'll take anything you're willing to give. The flowers were selfish. I walked past a field on my property and thought of you. The way you bring life into spaces that feel sterile. The way you notice small things others miss. I wanted you to have something that felt alive. The book was harder to explain. I've been reading it again myself. Trying to understand where the line is between justice and destruction. I'm not sure I've found it yet. But I'm looking. You changed something in me, Krista. I don't know how to go back to who I was before you. I don't want to. Whatever you decide, whatever you need, I'll be here. Waiting. Burning. Trying to become someone worthy of the way you looked at me before everything broke. Facino. Krista sat in her car for a long time after reading the letter. The parking lot emptied around her. The sun set. The streetlights flickered on. She read the letter again. Then once more. 47 times he'd said. He'd read her words 47 times. She believed him. The following week, Krista made a decision. She called her mother first. I'm going to see him, she said. Not to forgive him. Not to start anything. I just need to look at him again. See who he is now that I know everything. Her mother was quiet for a moment. And if you look at him and see a monster, then I'll walk away. For good. And if you don't? Krista closed her eyes. Then I'll figure out what comes next. You want my blessing? I want your honesty. Her mother sighed. The sound carried years of grief and wisdom and hard-won understanding. Darius is gone, she said finally. Nothing brings him back. Nothing makes it right. But you're still here. You're still living. And I raised you to make your own choices even when they're hard. Pause. Go see this man, Krista. Look him in the eyes. And trust yourself to know what you find there. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby girl. Always. She didn't call ahead. Didn't send a letter. She simply drove. The route to his lake house was burned into her memory. An hour north. The private road through bare trees. The iron gates that opened without her having to announce herself. Someone had been watching. Someone had told him she was coming. The house looked different in daylight. Softer. The harsh angles of modern architecture balanced by the sprawling landscape around it. The lake shimmered in the late winter sun, ice receding at the edges. She parked and walked to the front door. It opened before she could knock. Facino stood in the doorway. He looked better than the last time she'd seen him. Less haunted. But there were still shadows under his eyes. A wariness in his posture. Like he was bracing for a blow he knew he deserved. You came, he said. I came. Neither of them moved. The space between them felt charged. Weighted with everything they'd said and everything they hadn't. Can I come in? Krista asked. He stepped aside without a word. The interior was warm. A fire burning in the main room. The same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. But something had changed. The house felt less like a showpiece and more like a home. She noticed books stacked on tables. A half-empty coffee cup. A blanket thrown carelessly over the couch. Signs of life. Signs of someone actually living here, not just existing. You want something to drink? Facino asked. Coffee? Something stronger. Water is fine. He disappeared into the kitchen. Krista moved to the windows and looked out at the lake. She thought about Darius. About the brother she'd lost and the secrets he'd kept. About the impossible tangle of love and anger and grief that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the man in the kitchen. The man who had ordered her brother's death and cried in her living room. The man who had sent her wildflowers and books and letters filled with words that felt like prayers. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know what was possible. But she was here. That had to count for something. Facino returned with a glass of water and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. Neither of them pulled away. "I read your letter," she said. "Every word. I meant every word. I know you did." She took a sip of water. Set the glass down on the windowsill. "That's what scares me." His brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because it would be easier if you were lying. Easier if you were manipulating me. Easier if I could look at you and see nothing but the man who destroyed my family." She turned to face him fully. "But that's not what I see." "What do you see?" He studied his face. The hard lines and sharp angles. The tattoo at his throat. The eyes that had tracked her every movement since the moment they met. "I see someone who's done terrible things," she said slowly. "Someone who's lived a life I can barely comprehend. Someone who carries more blood on his hands than I could ever understand." His jaw tightened. He didn't look away. "But I also see someone who told me the truth when lies would have been easier. Someone who let me walk away without trying to stop me. Someone who's been sending me flowers and books and letters like he's trying to learn a language he never spoke before." "Krista, let me finish." He took a breath. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if that's even the right word for what I'm trying to do. Forgiveness sounds too clean. Too complete. What I'm feeling isn't clean at all." "Then what is it?" She considered the question. Really turned it over in her mind before answering. "It's choosing to stay in the room with the pain. Choosing to look at it instead of running away. Choosing to believe that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done." She paused. "You told me that once. In the hospital. You said everyone deserves care when they're hurting." "I remember. I'm starting to think that includes you." Something shifted in his expression. The wariness cracked. Beneath it she saw hope. Raw and desperate and terrified. "I don't deserve your kindness," he said. "Not after what I did. Maybe not. But I'm not doing this for you." She stepped closer. Close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat. "I'm doing this for me. Because carrying this hate was killing me. Because I don't want to become someone who can't see the humanity in anyone. Not even someone who's hurt me this badly." Facino's eyes were wet again. He made no effort to hide it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me. Anything. I'll do it." Krista reached up slowly. Gave him time to pull away. He didn't. She placed her hand on his chest. Over his heart. She could feel it pounding beneath her palm. "I want you to keep trying," she said. "I want you to keep choosing differently. I want you to prove that the man I saw in that hospital room, the one who was scared and lonely and desperate for someone to see him, wasn't a lie. He wasn't. Then show me. Not with grand gestures. Not with gifts or letters or promises. Show me through who you are every single day." He covered her hand with his own. His grip was firm but gentle. Grounding. "And if I do?" he asked. "If I spend the rest of my life proving that person is real?" Krista looked up at him. The man who had killed her brother. The man who had made her feel seen. The man who stood before her now, stripped of armor, waiting for her judgment. "Then maybe," she said slowly, "we find out what happens next. Together." The word hung between them. Together. It felt impossible. It felt terrifying. It felt like the first honest thing either of them had said in a long time. Facino lifted her hand from his chest and brought it to his lips. The kiss he pressed against her palm was gentle. Reverent. A promise sealed without words. "I'll spend every day earning that maybe," he said against her skin. Every single day. She believed him. That was the most terrifying part. They talked for hours. Not about the future. Not about what they were or what they might become. They talked about the past. About Darius. About who he was and what he meant to her. Facino listened. Really listened. He asked questions. He didn't try to defend himself or minimize what had happened. He just sat with her grief and let her speak. She told him about their childhood in Detroit. About the way Darius used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, always burning the first batch because he got distracted by cartoons. About the time he'd punched a boy who made Krista cry and then gotten suspended for a week. About the way he'd called her every Sunday night without fail, even when life got busy, just to hear her voice and make sure she was okay. "He sounds like a good man," Facino said when she paused. "He was." Her voice caught. "He was the best man I've ever known." Facino nodded slowly. "Then I took something irreplaceable from the world. From you. From your mother." He met her eyes. "I need you to know that I understand that. I'll never stop understanding it." "I know." The sun had set hours ago. The fire had burned low. Outside, the lake reflected starlight like scattered diamonds. Krista realized she was exhausted. The emotional toll of the day had drained her completely. Facino noticed. Of course he did. "You should rest," he said. "I have guest rooms. You can stay here tonight. Drive back in the morning." She hesitated. Staying felt significant. Like crossing another line she couldn't uncross. But the thought of driving back to Chicago right now, of being alone in her apartment with all of this, felt unbearable. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." He showed her to a guest room on the second floor. Simple. Clean. A window that overlooked the lake. At the doorway he paused. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For coming here. For talking to me. For giving me the chance to." He stopped. Started again. "Just, thank you." Krista looked at him. This complicated, damaged, dangerous man who was trying so hard to become something different. She stepped forward and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Just his cheek. A small gesture. But it meant everything. "Good night, Facino." His eyes closed briefly. When they opened they were soft. "Good night, Krista." He walked away. She watched him go until he disappeared down the stairs. Then she closed the door, changed into the soft clothes someone had laid out for her and climbed into bed. For the first time in weeks she slept without dreaming. Krista woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The bed was too soft. The sheets were too expensive. The light coming through the window was wrong. Then she remembered. She sat up slowly, letting the events of the previous day settle back into place. The drive. The conversation. The kiss on his cheek that had felt like stepping off a cliff. She was still falling. She didn't know where she would land. But the terror had faded into something else. Something that felt almost like anticipation. She found clothes waiting for her on a chair by the window. Simple things. Dark jeans. A cream-colored sweater that was softer than anything she owned. They fit perfectly. She didn't want to think about how he knew her size. She added it to the list of things she wasn't ready to examine. Downstairs, Facino was standing at the kitchen counter, his back to her. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders. His tattoos were visible now. The snake winding up his forearm. Words in Italian script along his bicep. A pattern she couldn't identify spreading across his upper back. He was cooking. Krista stopped in the doorway. Watched him crack eggs into a pan with the same precision he probably used for everything else. "You cook," she said. He turned. Something in his expression softened when he saw her. "My mother taught me. Before she died." He gestured to the stool at the counter. "Sit. It's almost ready." She sat. The kitchen was warm. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The lake sparkled in the distance. It felt domestic. Normal. Like this was any other morning between any other two people. The disconnect between the scene and reality made her head spin. Facino set a plate in front of her. Eggs. Toast. Fresh fruit. A cup of coffee exactly how she liked it. "How do you know I take my coffee with cream and 1 sugar?" she asked. "I pay attention." Of course he did. She was starting to realize that nothing about this man was accidental. Every gesture. Every word. Every detail filed away for future reference. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. They ate in comfortable silence. The food was good. Simple but perfectly executed. When she finished, she pushed her plate aside and looked at him. "What happens now?" Facino set down his coffee cup. His expression grew serious. "That depends on you. I don't know what I want yet. I told you that." "I know. And I'm not asking you to decide anything today." He leaned forward slightly. But there are things you should understand. About my life. About what it would mean to be part of it. I'm listening. He stood and moved to the window. For a long moment he just looked out at the lake. I'm not a good man, he said finally. We've established that. The things I've done, they don't disappear because I want them to. The people I've hurt don't come back. The blood doesn't wash off. I know. But I am trying to change. Not everything. Not all at once. But the parts one can control. He turned to face her. I've been stepping back from certain operations. Delegating to people I trust. Creating distance between myself and the things that keep me up at night. Why? Because of you. He said it simply. Without drama. Because I looked at who I was through your eyes and I didn't like what I saw. Because I realized that the empire I built was also a prison. And the only person who ever made me want to escape it was you. Krista's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. I'm not asking you to accept what I am, he continued. I'm telling you that I'm trying to become something different. Something that might deserve the way you looked at me before you knew the truth. And if you can't change, if the life you've built won't let you go, his jaw tightened, then I'll tear it down, piece by piece, whatever it takes. You'd give up everything you've built? For you. He held her gaze. Without hesitation. The words landed in her chest like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spreading outward, touching everything. She stood and walked toward him. Stopped when they were close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I can't promise anything, she said. I need you to understand that. I'm not ready to say this is going to work. I'm not ready to say I can get past what happened. I understand. But I'm willing to try. To take it slow. To see if the man you're trying to become is someone I can build something with. Facino's breath caught. His eyes searched her face like he was looking for the catch. The condition. The thing that would snatch this moment away. What do you need from me? He asked. Krista thought about it. Really considered what would help her move forward. Honesty, she said finally. Complete honesty. No secrets. No half-truths. If I ask you something, you tell me the answer even if it's hard. Done. And patience. I'm going to have bad days. Days when I look at you and all I can see is Darius. Days when I'm angry and I don't want to be touched. You need to be okay with that. I can do that. And one more thing. She paused. Gathered her courage. I want to know everything about that night. Not now. Not today. But eventually. I want to understand exactly what happened. How it happened. Every detail. Pain flickered across his face. But he nodded. When you're ready, he said. I'll tell you everything. She believed him. That was the strange thing. After everything, after all the reasons she had to doubt him, she believed him. Maybe that made her foolish. Maybe it made her broken. Or maybe it made her brave. They spent the rest of the morning walking the property. The lake house sat on 30 acres of land. Bare trees lined paths that wound through the landscape. A wooden dock stretched out over the water, its surface glazed with thin ice. They walked side by side. Not touching, but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Facino told her about buying the property 5 years ago. How he'd come here when the noise of the city became too loud. How he'd stood on this dock countless times, staring at the water, wondering if anything he'd done had meaning. I thought power would make me happy, he said. When I was young. When my father was teaching me how the world worked. I thought if I could just get to the top, everything would make sense. Did it? He shook his head. It made everything worse. The higher I climbed, the lonelier I got. The more people feared me, the less they saw me. He glanced at her. You were the first person in years who looked at me like I was human. You are human. Sometimes I forget. They reached the dock. Walked to the edge. The lake stretched out before them, vast and gray and somehow peaceful. Darius would have liked this, Krista said quietly. He always talked about buying property outside the city. Getting away from everything. Building a life that was simple. Tell me more about him. So she did. She told him about their father who had worked 2 jobs to keep them fed and died of a heart attack when Krista was 16. About how Darius had stepped up, becoming the man of the house overnight. About the sacrifices he'd made so she could go to nursing school. She told him about their arguments. The stupid fights over nothing that siblings always have. The time she didn't speak to him for 2 weeks because he'd told her boyfriend that he wasn't good enough for her. He was right, by the way, she said with a sad smile. That boyfriend turned out to be a nightmare. Darius sounds like he was protective. He was too protective sometimes. He never could accept that I could take care of myself. Facino was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's why he got involved with the Morettas. He was still trying to protect you, even when it meant crossing lines he shouldn't have crossed. Krista considered that. It fit with everything she knew about her brother. His fierce loyalty, his inability to ask for help, his conviction that he could handle anything alone. We're alike that way, she admitted. Stubborn, independent, convinced we don't need anyone. And look where it got both of you. She turned to face him. What do you mean? He's dead because he tried to carry too much alone. And you almost buried yourself in grief because you wouldn't let anyone in. Facino's voice was gentle. Maybe the lesson is that strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to lean on someone else. That's very philosophical for a crime boss. His mouth twitched. I read. She laughed. Real laugh. The first one she'd managed in weeks. Felt strange. Wrong almost. To laugh in the presence of the man who had caused her so much pain. But it also felt like healing. Like a crack of light finding its way into a dark room. They drove back to Chicago that afternoon. Facino insisted on following her car, making sure she got home safely. She didn't argue. Part of her liked knowing he was behind her. Watching. Protecting. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane. That she was walking into something that could destroy her. That she was ignoring every warning sign her instincts were throwing at her. But the rational part of her brain had kept her safe and alone for too long. Maybe it was time to try something different. She pulled into her apartment building's parking structure. Facino's black Mercedes followed, parking several spaces away. She got out of her car. He got out of his. They stood there in the dim parking structure, engines cooling around them, exhaust fumes hanging in the cold air. I'll call you, she said. When I'm ready to talk again. I'll be waiting. It might take time. Days. Maybe weeks. I have nothing but time. She nodded. Turned to walk toward the elevator. Krista. She stopped. Back. Facino was still standing by his car. His hands were in his pockets. His expression was open in a way she'd rarely seen. I know I've said it before, he said. But I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For Darius. For everything that brought us here. If I could take it back. You can't. I know. But if I could. He paused. I want you to know that I would trade everything I have. Everything I've built. Just to give him back to you. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. I know, she said softly. Good night, Facino. Good night, Krista. She walked to the elevator. Stepped inside. Pressed the button for her floor. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of him. Still standing by his car. Still watching her. Like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. The following weeks moved slowly. Krista returned to work. Threw herself into her patients. Let the rhythm of the hospital ground her in something concrete. But things were different now. She called her mother every Sunday night. The way Darius used to call her. They talked about everything and nothing. Filled the silence with connection. She started seeing a therapist. Someone Marcus had recommended. A woman with kind eyes who didn't judge and didn't push. Who let Krista unpack the tangled mess of grief and anger and hope at her own pace. And she talked to Facino. Not every day. Not at first. But gradually the calls became more frequent. The conversations grew longer. He told her about his childhood. About the violence he'd witnessed and the violence he'd learned to inflict. About the moment he realized he'd become his father and the moment he decided he didn't want to be. She told him about her fears. About the nightmares that still woke her sometimes. About the guilt she felt for wanting something with the man who had taken her brother away. They didn't rush. They didn't push. They just talked. And somewhere in those conversations something began to shift. The anger didn't disappear. The grief didn't fade. But they made room for other things. Understanding. Compassion. The tentative beginnings of trust. 1 month after their conversation at the lake house, Krista made a decision. She drove north again. Alone this time. Without calling ahead. The gates opened for her automatically. Someone was always watching. Facino was waiting on the porch when she pulled up. Like he'd known she was coming before she knew herself. She got out of the car and walked toward him. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly. But she didn't stop. She walked up the porch steps. Stood in front of him. Close enough to touch. "I'm ready," she said. His brow furrowed. Ready for what? To hear everything. About that night. About Darius. She took a breath. "I need to know. All of it. And then I need to decide if I can move forward with you or if this has to end." Facino's expression flickered. Fear. Pain. Resignation. But he nodded. "Come inside," he said. "I'll tell you everything." She followed him through the door. Into the truth she'd been running from. Into the fire that would either consume her or set her free. They sat in the living room. The same room where everything had shattered a month ago. The same windows overlooking the lake. The same fireplace now burning low, casting soft shadows across the walls. But everything felt different now. Krista sat on the couch. Facino sat across from her in the leather chair. A deliberate distance between them. Space for the words that needed to be spoken. He didn't start immediately. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white. His jaw worked like he was chewing on glass. She waited. She'd learned patience over the past few weeks. Learned that some things couldn't be rushed. Finally he spoke. February 15th. 2 years ago. His voice was low. Rough. I remember the date because it was the day after Valentine's Day. I'd spent the 14th at a restaurant downtown. Business dinner. The kind where you smile and shake hands and pretend you're not calculating how to destroy the person across from you. He paused. Stared at his hands. The Moretti family had been coming at me for months. Buying informants. Bribing officials. Building a case that would have put me away for life. He looked up at her. Your brother was part of that. He was good at his job. Too good. The information he'd gathered was damaging. Names. Dates. Transactions. If it got to the wrong people, everything I'd built would collapse. So you had him killed? No. The word came out sharp. Immediate. That's not what I ordered. I need you to understand that, Krista. I gave specific instructions. Scare him. Rough him up. Maybe put him in the hospital for a few days. Enough to send a message. Enough to make him stop. But that's not what happened. Facino's face twisted with something that looked like physical pain. I had a man working for me. Bruno Castellano. He'd been with my organization for 8 years. Loyal. Reliable. Or so I thought. He exhaled slowly. Bruno had his own ideas about how to handle threats. He believed in permanent solutions. And when I sent him to deal with your brother, he decided that my instructions were too soft. Krista's stomach churned. She pressed her hands against her thighs to keep them from shaking. What did he do? Facino was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. He cornered Darius in an alley behind his office. There were supposed to be 2 other men with him. Men I trusted to follow orders. His jaw tightened. But Bruno sent them away. Told them he'd handle it himself. And then he beat your brother. Badly. Beyond anything I'd authorized. Facino's eyes were wet now. He didn't wipe the tears away. When Darius wouldn't give up the information he'd gathered, Bruno, he went further. He pulled a gun. And he fired. The words hung in the air like smoke. Krista felt them settle into her bones. Into the hollow space where her brother used to live. He died quickly, Facino continued. His voice cracked. That's what they told me later. Bruno said he didn't suffer. But Bruno was a liar. A sociopath. So I don't know if that's true. I'll never know. What happened to Bruno? Facino's expression changed. Hardened into something cold and terrible. I found out 3 days later. One of my other men came to me. Told me what really happened. He paused. I had Bruno brought to me. Asked him why. Why he'd disobeyed my orders. Why he'd killed a man I'd specifically told him to leave alive. What did he say? He said that dead men don't talk. That he was doing me a favor. That I should be thanking him. Facino's hands clenched into fists. I broke every bone in his body before I killed him. Took 6 hours. And when it was done, I had what was left of him dumped in Lake Michigan. Krista stared at him. The man in front of her had tortured and killed another human being. With his own hands. Over the course of 6 hours. She should have been horrified. She should have run. But all she felt was a strange, terrible satisfaction. You did that for Darius? I did that because Bruno betrayed me. Because he thought he could make decisions I didn't authorize. Because he looked at me and saw weakness when I showed restraint. Facino met her eyes. But yes, also for Darius. Because even though I didn't know who he was to you, I knew that he didn't deserve to die. And the man who killed him deserved worse. The fire crackled. Outside, the lake reflected the gray winter sky. Krista processed everything she'd heard. The truth she'd been seeking for 2 years finally laid bare. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said finally. I don't know if forgiveness is even possible for something like this. I know. But I don't want to lose you either. And I hate myself for that. Facino stood slowly, moved toward her, stopped when there was just a foot of space between them. Then let's figure it out together, he said. One day at a time. No promises. No expectations. Just two broken people trying to build something that doesn't hurt. Krista looked up at him. The man who had killed her brother. The man who had made her feel seen. The man who stood before her now, stripped of armor, waiting for her judgment. She closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question rather than a declaration. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What if this destroys us? What if it saves us? 3 months later, Krista moved into the lake house. Her mother came to visit. Gave her blessing in her own complicated way. Life began to settle into something that almost resembled normal. Facino was changing. Stepping back from the darker parts of his business. Making choices that aligned with the man he was trying to become. Krista was healing. Slowly. Painfully. But genuinely. They were building something. Fragile and imperfect and real. Then the phone call came. It was a Tuesday evening. Krista was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Facino was in his office, handling business she'd learned not to ask about. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something made her swipe the screen. Hello. Is this Krista Miller? A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Professional. Who's asking? My name is Agent Thomas Rivera. FBI. I need to speak with you about your brother, Darius Miller. Krista's blood went cold. She set down the knife she'd been holding. My brother's been dead for 2 years. I'm aware. That's why I'm calling. Pause. Ms. Miller, there are things about your brother's death that you don't know. Things that change everything. What are you talking about? I can't discuss this over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? Alone. Don't tell anyone about this call. Especially not Facino Rizzo. Krista's hand trembled. How do you know about? Tomorrow. Noon. There's a diner called Rosie's on the corner of Madison and Halstead. Come alone. The line went dead. Krista stood in the kitchen, her heart pounding. The phone felt like a grenade in her hand. She should tell Facino. She knew that. No secrets. That was their rule. But something in the agent's voice had rattled her. Something that suggested the truth she'd accepted wasn't the whole truth. She didn't sleep that night. The next day she drove to Chicago alone. She told Facino she was meeting an old colleague from the hospital. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. But she needed to know what this agent had to say before she decided what to do with it. Rosie's Diner was a small place. Chrome and vinyl. The kind of establishment that had been serving the same coffee for 50 years. Agent Rivera was already seated in a back booth. Mid-40s. Gray suit. The kind of face that gave nothing away. Krista slid into the seat across from him. Thank you for coming, he said. I know this is unusual. Just tell me what you know about my brother. Rivera studied her for a moment. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Darius Miller wasn't just working for the Moretti family, he said. He was working for us. The words didn't compute. Krista shook her head. That's impossible. He was gathering evidence against Facino Rizzo. He was helping the Morettis take down. That's what everyone was supposed to think. Rivera slid the folder across the table. Your brother was an FBI informant. Had been for 18 months before his death. We planted him with the Morettis to gather intelligence on their operations. Krista opened the folder with numb fingers. Inside were documents. Reports. Photos of Darius meeting with men in suits who looked exactly like Agent Rivera. I don't understand, she whispered. The Morettas were our primary target. Your brother was feeding us information that would have brought down their entire organization. Rivera leaned forward. But somewhere along the line his cover was compromised. Someone inside our agency leaked his identity to the Morettas. And they had him killed. No. Rivera's expression hardened. They had him killed, yes. But they didn't use their own people. They manipulated Facino Rizzo into doing it for them. The diner seemed to tilt. Krista gripped the edge of the table. What? The Morettas knew that Rizzo would never sanction a killing without cause. So they fed him false information. Made it look like Darius was building a case against him specifically. They knew Rizzo would send men to scare him. And they had their own person inside Rizzo's organization, Bruno Castellano, ready to take it further. Bruno worked for the Morettas? Bruno was a Moretti plant from the beginning. 8 years inside Rizzo's operation, waiting for the right moment. Rivera's voice was flat, clinical. When Rizzo sent him after your brother, Bruno had his real orders. Kill Darius Miller. Make it look like Rizzo's doing. 2 birds, 1 stone. They eliminate our informant and set up their rival to take the fall. Krista couldn't breathe. The folder in front of her blurred. Everything she'd believed. Everything she'd struggled to accept. It was all a lie. Facino didn't order my brother's death, she said slowly. He was manipulated. He gave the order to confront your brother. That part is true. But the killing? That was always the Morettas' plan. Rizzo was just the weapon they used. Does he know this? No. And until now, neither did anyone else outside the bureau. Rivera closed the folder. We've been building a case against the Morettas for years. Your brother's death set us back significantly. But we're close now. Close enough that I'm willing to share this information with you. Why? Why tell me? Rivera's expression shifted. Something almost like sympathy flickered in his eyes. Because you're living with the man who thinks he's responsible for your brother's murder. And I thought you deserved to know the truth. He paused. Also because I need your help. Pie help. The Morettas know you're with Rizzo now. They see you as leverage. A way to get to him. Rivera leaned closer. We believe they're planning something. Something big. And you might be caught in the middle of it. Krista's mind was racing. The room felt too small. Too hot. What do you want me to do? For now. Nothing. Go back to your life. Don't tell Rizzo about this meeting. Rivera stood and dropped a card on the table. But when the time comes, and it will come, I'm going to need you to make a choice. Help us bring down the people who really killed your brother. Or protect the man you love and let them get away with it. He walked out of the diner without looking back. Krista sat alone in the booth, staring at the folder. At the card. At the shattered pieces of everything she thought she knew. She drove back to the lake house in a daze. Facino was waiting for her on the porch. He smiled when he saw her car pull up. That rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. How was your friend? He asked as she climbed the steps. Krista looked at him. This man who had carried the guilt of her brother's death for 2 years. This man who had tortured himself, changed himself, tried to become worthy of her forgiveness. He didn't know. He didn't know that he'd been used. That the blood on his hands was painted there by someone else. That the sin he'd been trying to atone for wasn't entirely his. He should tell him. She knew that. No secrets. But if she told him, what would he do? Go to war with the Morettas? Burn everything down in a quest for revenge? How many more people would die? It was fine, she heard herself say. Just catching up. Facino pulled her into his arms. Held her close. She could feel his heartbeat against her chest. Steady and strong and completely unaware of the bomb she was carrying. I missed you, he murmured against her hair. I missed you too. She held him tighter. Buried her face in his chest. And made a choice. She wouldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do with this information. Not until she understood what it would cost. Some truths she was learning were more dangerous than lies. That night, while Facino slept beside her, Krista lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about Darius. About the brother who had been braver than she ever knew. Who had walked into a den of wolves to serve his country and paid the ultimate price. She thought about Facino. The man she loved. the man who didn't deserve the guilt he carried. And she thought about the Morettis, the real villains, the ones who had orchestrated everything from the shadows. Agent Rivera had asked her to make a choice. Help bring them down or let them escape. But there was a third option. One he hadn't considered. What if she didn't have to choose between justice and love? What if she could have both? She turned her head and looked at Facino's sleeping face. Peaceful. Vulnerable. So different from the man the world saw. He loved him. That hadn't changed. If anything, it had deepened, knowing that the worst thing she'd blamed him for wasn't entirely his fault. But she also loved her brother. And Darius deserved justice. Real justice. Not the second-hand vengeance Facino had delivered to Bruno. The Morettis had taken her brother from her. They had manipulated the man she loved into becoming their weapon. They had caused 2 years of grief and guilt and pain. They needed to pay. And Krista Miller, the quiet nurse from Detroit, was going to make sure they did. She just had to figure out how. The next morning she found Facino in his office. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian, his expression hard. She waited in the doorway until he finished. Problem? She asked. The Morettis are making moves. Testing boundaries. My people are getting nervous. He rubbed his temples. It's probably nothing. But I need to handle it. Krista walked toward him. Sat on the edge of his desk. Tell me about them, she said. The Morettis. Everything. Facino raised an eyebrow. Why the sudden interest? Because they're threatening what's ours. And I want to understand what we're dealing with. He studied her face for a long moment. She kept her expression neutral. Curious but not alarming. Finally he nodded. The Moretti family has been my rival for 15 years. They control the South Side. Drugs mostly. Some trafficking. The kind of business I've always refused to touch. His jaw tightened. They're led by a man named Vincent Moretti. Smart. Patient. The kind of enemy who waits decades for the right moment to strike. And you think that moment is coming? I think it's already here. He took her hand. But I don't want you to worry about this. I'll handle it. I've been handling them my entire career. What if I want to help? The question hung between them. Facino's expression shifted from surprise to concern. This isn't your world, Krista. I won't drag you into it. I'm already in it. She squeezed his hand. I chose to be here. With you. That means your problems are my problems. Not these problems. These problems get people killed. She thought about Darius. About the folder hidden in her car. About the choice Rivera had placed in front of her. I know, she said quietly. I know better than you realize. Something flickered in Facino's eyes. Suspicion maybe. Or just confusion. But he didn't push. He never pushed. Just promise me you'll be careful, he said. Whatever's coming, I need to know you're safe. I promise. It wasn't a lie. He would be careful. But careful didn't mean passive. And safe didn't mean silent. Krista Miller had spent her whole life taking care of other people. Healing wounds. Fixing what was broken. Now it was time to break something herself. 1 week later she called Agent Rivera. I'm in, she said. Tell me what you need me to do. The months that followed were the most dangerous of Krista's life. She became a bridge between two worlds. The FBI fed her information about the Morettis operations. She fed them insights about Facino's organization. Carefully curated insights that protected him while exposing his enemies. It was a delicate balance. A tightrope walked over an abyss. But she walked it. Day after day. Lie after lie. She hated the deception. Hated looking into Facino's eyes and holding back the truth. But she told herself it was necessary. That the ends justified the means. That when it was all over she would tell him everything and he would understand. She had to believe that. Otherwise she couldn't do what needed to be done. The operation came together on a cold night in December. The FBI had enough evidence to take down the entire Moretti organization. Drug trafficking, money laundering, murder, including the conspiracy to kill Darius Miller. All they needed was one final piece. A meeting between Vincent Moretti and his top lieutenants, where incriminating conversations would be recorded. And Krista knew exactly how to make that meeting happen. She went to Facino with a proposal. The Morettis want a truce, she said. A meeting to discuss territories. End the conflict. Facino's eyes narrowed. How do you know this? I have sources. People who talk to me because I'm not you. She held his gaze. This could be an opportunity. A chance to end this war without more bloodshed. Or it could be a trap. Everything's a trap. The question is who's setting it. She took his hand. Trust me. I wouldn't suggest this if I didn't think it was safe. He studied her for a long moment. The suspicion was there. He could see it. But so was the trust they'd built over the past year. When, he finally asked. 3 days. Neutral location. I'll arrange everything. He nodded slowly. Hey, but I want my best people there. And I want you as far from that meeting as possible. Agreed. She kissed him. Deep and long and full of everything she couldn't say. When she pulled back, his eyes were soft. I love you, he said. I love you too. He meant it. God help her, she meant it. But love didn't change what she had to do. The meeting happened 3 nights later. Vincent Moretti arrived with 12 of his top men. Facino brought his own contingent. They met in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where no one would hear anything that happened inside. Krista watched from a surveillance van 2 blocks away, surrounded by FBI agents and their equipment. The recording devices were working. Every word inside that warehouse was being captured, transmitted, documented. Vincent Moretti talked about the old days. About respect. About how things could be different if they worked together. And then he talked about Darius. Your little nurse, Vincent said, his voice crackling through the speakers. She's been asking questions. Digging into her brother's death. Did you know that? Krista's blood went cold. Facino's response was careful. Measured. What do you know about her brother? I know he was a Fed. I know we had to take care of him before he brought us all down. Vincent laughed. And I know that you were kind enough to do our dirty work for us. Bruno was always good at following orders. Just not yours. The silence that followed was deafening. Krista watched the monitors. Watched Facino's face transform from confusion to understanding to something that looked like the end of the world. You set me up, he said quietly. We used you, Vincent corrected. There's a difference. And now your little nurse has been helping the feds build a case against us. Did you know that too? Krista stopped breathing. No. How did he know? She's been feeding them information for months, Vincent continued. Wearing a wire, we think. Leading them right to this meeting. He laughed again. Which is why this meeting isn't what she thinks it is. On the monitors, Krista saw Vincent's men pull out weapons. Saw Facino's people do the same. And then she saw Vincent look directly at the camera hidden in the warehouse. The camera he wasn't supposed to know about. He smiled. Hello, Ms. Miller, he said. Did you really think we didn't know? Everything happened at once. Gunfire erupted in the warehouse. On the monitors, bodies fell. Blood sprayed. Chaos consumed the feed. In the surveillance van, agents shouted into radios. Backup was called. Doors burst open. But Krista wasn't listening. She was already running. She reached the warehouse as the FBI tactical team breached the building. More gunfire. More shouting. The sounds of a war being fought in close quarters. She pushed through the chaos. Ignored the agents telling her to stay back. Ignored everything except the need to find him. She found Facino on the warehouse floor. He was alive. Bleeding from a wound in his shoulder. But alive. Vincent Moretti lay dead beside him, a bullet hole in his forehead. Around them, the aftermath of violence. Bodies from both sides. The Moretti leadership, decimated. Facino's people wounded but mostly standing. The FBI was taking control. Arrests being made. Evidence being secured. But all Krista could see was Facino's face when he looked at her. He knew. He knew everything. You lied to me, he said. His voice was hollow. I was trying to protect you. You were working with the FBI. Behind my back. For months. They killed Darius. The Morettis. Not you. They used you, Facino. They manipulated. I know what they did. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. I just watched Vincent Moretti confess to everything. Right before I put a bullet in his skull. Then you understand. I had to. You had to lie to me. You had to betray my trust. You had to become exactly the kind of person I was trying to stop being. The words hit her like blows. Each one landing somewhere vital. I did it for you, she whispered. I did it for Darius. I did it because there was no other way. There's always another way. He stared at her with eyes that had gone cold. Did you just didn't trust me enough to find it together? He walked past her, toward the warehouse exit, toward the waiting FBI agents who would have questions he wasn't going to answer. Facino. He stopped. Didn't turn around. I meant what I said before, he said quietly. About spending my life trying to be worthy of you. About changing who I was. I know you did. But I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me. Who lies to my face and calls it love. He paused. Goodbye, Krista. He walked away. And Krista stood in the blood-soaked warehouse, surrounded by the ruins of everything she'd built, and realized that she had won. The Morettas were finished. Darius had been avenged. Justice had been served. But victory had never felt so much like defeat. 6 months later, Krista sat on the porch of her mother's house in Detroit, watching the sun set over the neighborhood she'd grown up in. The Moretti case had made national news. The FBI had brought down an entire criminal organization. Dozens of arrests. Life sentences for everyone involved. Krista's role had been kept quiet. Agent Rivera had made sure of that. As far as the public knew, she was just a nurse who had gotten mixed up with dangerous people. She'd moved back to Detroit after everything fell apart. Returned to the hospital where she'd first started her career. Tried to rebuild a life from the wreckage. It was quiet now. Simple. Safe. And empty. She thought about Facino every day. Wondered where he was. What he was doing. Whether he'd found a way to keep changing without her. She tried to reach out once, 2 months after the warehouse. Left a voicemail that went unanswered. Sent a letter that was returned unopened. He'd meant what he said. He was done. He understood. She'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. Trust, once shattered, didn't reassemble like broken bones. But understanding didn't stop the ache. Didn't fill the hollow space where hope used to live. Her mother came out onto the porch and sat beside her. You're thinking about him again, she said. Is it that obvious? Baby girl, I raised you. I know every thought in your head before you think it. Krista smiled sadly. I made mistakes, Mama. Big ones. You did what you thought was right. That's all any of us can do. Her mother took her hand. Darius would be proud of you, you know. You finished what he started. You took down the people who killed him. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Her mother squeezed her fingers. But it's something. And something is better than nothing. They sat in silence as the sky turned orange, then purple, then dark. When Krista finally went inside, she found an envelope on the kitchen table. No return address. Her name written in handwriting she recognized instantly. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. And a ring. A thin gold band with a small diamond. His mother's ring. The one he'd given her as a promise. She unfolded the paper and read. Krista, I've spent 6 months trying to hate you. It would be easier if I could. Easier if I could look at what you did and see nothing but betrayal. But that's not what I see. I see a woman who loved her brother. Who wanted justice. Who was willing to sacrifice everything, including us, to get it. I can't say I would have done the same. I can't say I understand all of your choices. But I can say that I've had time to think. Time to remember who I was before you and who I became because of you. You made me better. Even when you were lying to me. Even when you were working against me. You made me want to be someone worth saving. I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm also not ready to spend the rest of my life without you. The ring was a promise. I'm giving it back because that promise was broken. By both of us. But if you're willing to try again, if you think there's any chance we can rebuild what we destroyed, meet me at the lake house. 1 week from today. I'll be waiting. No more secrets. No more lies. Just 2 broken people trying one more time. Facino. Krista read the letter 3 times. Then once more. She held the ring in her palm. Felt its weight. Its meaning. Everything in her wanted to run to him. To get in her car and drive north and fall into his arms and never let go. But she'd learned something over the past 6 months. About herself. About what she was capable of. She wasn't the same woman she'd been before. The one who followed her heart without thinking. The one who believed love could conquer everything. She was harder now. Wiser. More careful. But she was also still capable of hope. She looked at the ring one more time. Made her decision. Then she started packing. 1 week later, Krista pulled up to the lake house. It looked the same as she remembered. The modern architecture. The bare trees. The lake stretching out like a mirror reflecting the winter sky. Facino was standing on the porch. Waiting. Just like he'd said he would be. He looked different. Thinner. Tired. Like the past 6 months had cost him as much as they'd cost her. She got out of the car and walked toward him. Stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched. Full of everything that had happened. Everything that still hung between them. Finally, Krista reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. "You said this was a promise," she said. "That it was broken." Facino nodded slowly. "It was." "Then maybe we need to make a new one." He climbed the steps. Stood in front of him. Close enough to see the pain in his eyes, and the hope buried beneath it. "I lied to you. I went behind your back. I broke your trust in ways that might never fully heal. I know. But I did it because I thought it was the only way. Because I loved my brother and I loved you and I couldn't figure out how to honor both of those things." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have told you the truth and let us face it together. Yes, you should have. I'm sorry. Not for wanting justice. But for how I went about it. For treating you like an obstacle instead of a partner." Facino's expression softened. Just slightly. Just enough. "I'm sorry too," he said. "For walking away. For not giving you a chance to explain. For spending 6 months punishing both of us because my pride was hurt." "Your pride. My pride. My trust. My heart." He reached out and took the ring from her hand. "You shattered all of it. And I couldn't figure out how to put the pieces back together. And now." He looked at the ring. At her. At the space between them that had once felt impossible to cross. "Now I think the pieces don't go back the way they were. But maybe they can go back in a new shape. Something different. Something stronger." He took her left hand. Fully. Giving her time to pull away. He didn't. He slid the ring onto her finger. "Not a promise to return. A promise to begin again. No more secrets," he said. "No more secrets. No more lies. No more lies. Just us. Whatever that looks like. Whatever it costs." She stepped closer. Pressed her forehead against his. Felt his breath mingle with hers. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I never stopped. Even when I wanted to." She kissed him. Not soft this time. Not tentative. This kiss was a claiming. A declaration. A promise sealed with lips and breath and the desperation of two people who had almost lost each other forever. When they finally broke apart, they were both crying. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go inside. We talk. Really talk. About everything." He took her hand. "And then we figure out what the rest of our lives looks like. Together." He smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him in 6 months. Together. 2 years later, on a warm June evening, Krista and Facino stood on the dock behind the lake house. The sun was setting. The water was calm. Their families, what remained of them, watched from the shore. A simple ceremony. Just the people who mattered. Krista wore a white dress that her mother had helped her choose. Facino wore a dark suit that made his eyes look almost soft. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Words about trust and forgiveness and the hard work of loving someone despite everything. When the officiant pronounced them married, Facino kissed her with the same intensity he'd shown from the very beginning. Like she was oxygen. Like she was everything. Later, as they danced alone on the dock, he held her close and whispered in her ear. "I have something to tell you." Krista's heart stuttered. After everything, those words still triggered fear. But his expression wasn't worried. It was something else. Hopeful. "What is it?" "I'm out. Completely. I sold the organization to someone I trust. Someone who will run it better than I ever did." He pulled back to look at her. "I'm done with that life. All of it. For good." She stared at him. "You gave up everything?" "No." He touched her face. "I gained everything. It just took me a while to realize it." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll spend the rest of your life with me. Building something that matters. Something real." She kissed him instead of answering. But the kiss was answer enough. Sometimes Krista still thought about Darius. Not with the sharp pain of loss that had once defined her days, but with something softer. A bittersweet ache that reminded her of who she'd been and who she'd become. She'd named their first son after him. Darius Rizzo. Born 1 year after the wedding. A perfect combination of both of them, her brother's spirit and his father's intensity. He watched him grow. Watched Facino become a father. Watched this man who had once commanded an empire of fear learn to change diapers and read bedtime stories and love without reservation. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was better. Some nights she sat on the dock alone looking up at the stars and talked to her brother. She told him about the baby. About Facino. About the strange winding path that had led her here. She never heard a response. She didn't expect one. But sometimes when the wind was quiet and the lake was still, she felt something. A presence. A warmth. Like Darius was listening. Like he approved. Some stories end where they begin. In hospital rooms. In quiet moments. In the space between heartbeats where everything changes. This one started with a man who couldn't stop watching a woman he wasn't supposed to touch. It ended with two people who found each other in the wreckage of everything they'd lost. Lost each other again. And chose to find their way back. Not because it was easy. Because it was worth it. The truth is, love doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't promise happy endings or easy roads. It just asks you to show up. To try. To keep choosing each other even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Krista Miller learned that the hardest way possible. She learned that secrets destroy the things they're meant to protect. That justice isn't always clean. That the line between right and wrong isn't a line at all. It's a fog you walk through hoping you come out somewhere better than where you started. She also learned that forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a practice. Something you choose every single day for as long as it takes. Some days are easier than others. But the love she found made every hard day worth it. And the man who once destroyed her world became the one who helped her rebuild it. That's the thing about dark stories. They're not really about the darkness. They're about the light you find when you refuse to stop looking. Thank you so much for staying with me through this story. If there was a moment that stayed with you, something that made you pause or feel or remember something you'd almost forgotten, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from today. And if this is the kind of story that feels like home to you, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be here with another one soon. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.